Half hour away from the opens at Hong Kong, Shenzhen, and Shanghai. You're watching The China Show. I'm Yvonne Man with David Ingles.
Good morning. Let's get to your top stories today. Caution in the markets. It's ahead of the Fed decision. Trade in focus, too, as well. You have the U.S. and China agreeing to keep talking about a tariff truce extension, with President Trump making the final call.
Meanwhile, U.S. allies Taiwan and India scramble to get their own deals wrapped up ahead of that August 1st deadline.
And earnings season heats up in China, with CATL and HSBC on deck today to report their quarterly numbers. We'll have previews just ahead. Good morning. Welcome to the show. Midweek session is about 29 minutes away. The state of equity markets on your screen, slightly catching a bids, although this is really, when you look at a volume story, more a holding pattern ahead of some key risk events out there. I mean, the next 48 hours, not to mention even trade, earnings, you have a Fed decision coming up as well, could sway, of course, the pendulum in certain ways. On top of that, and we'll talk more about this in a moment, of course, this massive 8.0 earthquake in Russia, and we're now looking at tsunami warnings, including in Japan, in Tokyo Bay. We'll get you guys updated on that in a moment. Dollar-yen coming up very, very shortly on your screens, is somewhat reacting to that already. Euro-dollar on your screens as well. Right, now this goes into the story today where the dollar was extending past tense gains for a fifth day. That still might be the case, in fact, when you look at some other crosses, but certainly not with the not in the case of the Japanese yen, which is seeing some strength right now. Perhaps on the back of what's taking place. Again, we'll get you guys updated, of course, on that earthquake in a moment. 2s and 10s, earthquake in Russia, to be more specific again. 2s and 10s on your screens. You have a Fed decision coming up. Bond bears have pulled back a little bit, of course, some of their bets. So low rates, maybe not today, and maybe no clarity on that either, as far as that's concerned. Oil has been on an uptrend recently. That's coming up on your screens. The Shanghai crude contract is just coming online as well. One to watch. Now, within the commodity space, it's really also this rally in metals prices. And at the bottom, you see rebar futures up. We're looking at a 12% gain now from about the lows of this year. Biggest gain in 2025. On Tuesday, and as you can see, we're building on those gains even further right now. We'll talk more about this in a moment. A50 futures coming up on your screens. 10-year yield. This melts up in yields. I think the 10-year yield is now at about nearly a 4-month high at $174. China on your screens. We're looking at a weaker start going into the session today.
Yeah, certainly that's one thing in focus. What's happened in the last few minutes is, of course, these tsunami warnings, as you mentioned, Dave. You're seeing basically dollar, yen, they're sort of falling off a cliff, right, because of the headlines that we're seeing. This powerful earthquake, the magnitude of 8.7, as we've been talking about near Russia here, according to the U.S. Geological Survey. So that's why we're seeing these tsunami warnings all the way from Tokyo Bay to Hawaii, parts of Alaska here as well. We'll try to give you a map on what this all looks like. But you are seeing tsunami watch in full force on the California-Mexico border as well. So Guam is also under tsunami watch.
Yeah, so Guam, in within the last 2 minutes, a tsunami warning has been issued for the state of Hawaii. Map go on your screens. That massive red circle you see towards the center at the very top indicates, of course, the magnitude of that earthquake that just hit. Eastern part of Russia, and of course, the other thing we were just mentioning right now, yen is gaining against the dollar. You're looking at a tsunami warning for areas including Tokyo Bay. Let's bring in our colleague out of Tokyo right now, John Herskovits, to give us a sense of what's going on there. Yeah, John, I guess get us up to speed here.
Sure. We've got a tsunami warning that's for a huge part of eastern Japan, from Hokkaido through most of Honshu, the main island. This includes Tokyo, parts of the Osaka region. The tsunami is going to start coming ashore within the next few minutes, and it's probably going to go about down the Japan coast for the next 90 minutes to 2 hours, according to the meteorological agency. The wave is predicted to be at a height of 3 meters. So this is something, areas close to shore can be affected. I mean, this includes things like Tokyo Bay is under a warning. You have something like Haneda Airport, which is right on Tokyo Bay. It's pretty low-lying. This is something that we need to watch out for. So it's a large part of Japan. Many big cities, Tokyo. This also includes the Tohoku region, which was hit in the 2011 tsunami. So I'm just listening to NHK, the national broadcaster, issuing warnings to people in these areas to evacuate and get to high land as quickly as possible.
John, can you tell us a bit more about that location, right? Is this region prone to tsunamis, and what impact might this have on the country now?
Sure. I mean, part of this region, the entire coast of Japan, both sides, are prone to tsunamis, but something of this scale hasn't been seen for a while. The 2011 tsunami in the Tohoku region was mostly that was the northeastern part of Japan. That tsunami averaged about 10 to 15 meters. The one that we're looking at now is about 3 meters, but it's a huge area with a lot of big cities which can be hit by it. So it's a worry for the country. And we're going to start seeing it come ashore from places in Hokkaido over the next few minutes. And for the next 90 minutes or 2 hours, the tsunami will be going down the Japanese coast, and we'll see what happens. So the warnings are out there. The people here are prepared for tsunamis. It's a part of life here, as earthquakes. So the government is warning, and we'll see how it plays out.
John, thanks for that update. We'll certainly come back to you if you have any more updates for us. That's our East Asia government editor, John Herskovits, there on the latest of this tsunami watch in Japan right now. Another one of our top stories, of course, is what's happening in Sweden. The U.S. and China have wrapped up their meetings in Stockholm with no deal to extend a tariff truce. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent saying that President Trump will make the final call.
We don't want to decouple. We just need to de-risk with certain strategic industries, whether it's the rare earth, semiconductors, medicines, and we talked about what we could do together to get into balance within the relationships.
All right, let's bring in our China correspondent, Min Lo. So they agree to keep talking, but we're not sure about what this whole extension, whether we get it or not.
Yes, Scott Bessent reportedly said good things about it to his boss. Trump said that Scott Bessent felt very good about those talks. Not clear yet whether there will be an extension, but the mood music is quite hopeful. Both sides saying that the talks were constructive, were candid, were wide-ranging. And of course, one of the big issues that was on the table was rare earths. Jamieson Greer saying he never wants to talk about it again. As far as he's concerned, that's case closed. The U.S. wanted reassurance from China that rare earths will continue to flow. They got that. According to Jamieson Greer, this is the biggest concession that China has given them so far. Now, he was asked about the Section 232 investigation into the different sectors like pharmaceuticals, semiconductors. China wanted an update on that. But the U.S. says essentially that this is going to be announced later. There will not be any exemptions for any country. It's going to be universal. And when it comes to Chinese buying of Russian oil, Scott Bessent mentioned in a press briefing that he warned China of potential sanctions, secondary sanctions on China for buying that oil, potentially perhaps up to 100%, as President Trump has threatened when he put this ultimatum on Putin. So this is something that could be very tricky for China because their largest source of crude oil is from Russia. And this is where things were left a little bit open. Scott Bessent mentioned that China expressed its concern, saying they will protect their energy sovereignty, but Bessent basically told them that it's up to them if they want to pay the 100% tariff. So there's still some issues to be addressed, but overall it seems that they covered a lot of ground, and President Trump also acknowledged that he is going to meet with President Xi before the end of the year.
Now, separately, something I want to ask you. So the finance minister wrote in Study Times, and I guess for context for our viewers who might not be too familiar, this is a journal under the Communist Party Central Party School. It's a glimpse into policy intentions. What did he write? What was it about?
Yes, it's a very, very long and chunky article, and I read it so you don't have to, but it was basically an assessment of how the economy is doing. There were a lot of statistics, but the conclusion is that uncertainty is increasing. So he tackled all the big problems in the economy, including real estate, the debt problem, consumption problem. So he talked about how the focus continues to be on expanding consumption, especially when it comes to elder care, child care, tourism. Already we have seen some government instructions on, giving out more subsidies when it comes to childcare for kids under 3. There's been also a focus on taxation reform and shifting the collection of consumption tax from the central government to the local government. And this is particularly critical because it would reshape the incentives for local governments for them to increase consumption targets rather than production targets. So it would go some way to reduce that overcapacity problem and maybe boost domestic consumption. You talked about the real estate problem as well and continuing to develop this new model of real estate development, which according to sources really is about, not allowing developers to sell or to pre-sell homes that are not yet built. So again, a supply side reform there, and as well front-loading the issuance and usage of local government special bonds and central government special bonds. So nothing we haven't heard before, but it's a reiteration that these sort of priorities remain important to the government amid the current economic environment.
Right. Min, thank you so much. Min Lo, our China correspondent there. We'll turn our attention back to Japan, of course, where the developing story, 8.7 earthquake in Russia, tsunami warnings all over the place, including in Japan, state of Hawaii as well. We'll get to Hawaii in a moment here. So a couple of things here. So Japan, a few minutes ago, has issued a tsunami warning for areas, including in Tokyo Bay. You're looking at live pictures right now of the north of Japan. This is in Hokkaido. Hiro is what you're seeing on your screens, where it's just gone past 10 in the morning. We're also getting word from Tohoku Electric that no tsunami impact so far, at least no tsunami impact, let me just clarify that, on its Onagawa nuclear plant, which is in Miyagi, of course, in Japan. So once we have more updates and details, we are on Tsunami Watch. We will get those to you a bit later on in the show. Right, coming up here on shows as well, we'll talk more about this. There's lots to unpack as far as the Chinese markets go. Going into the open today, 18 minutes away, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and here in Hong Kong. We're also watching literally the weather, where a typhoon is headed and expected to make landfall in Shanghai today. This is the China Show. Right, welcome back. We're cutting down to the open of trade, 15 minutes away, the Wednesday session. We're looking at delivery, logistics, after China's now looking at that specific sector as far as being able to curb excessive competition. Steel prices have been on the way up, including the 10-year yield, which is at about 4-month highs. Earnings on your screens, data as far as Macau is concerned, and of course we're also in Weather Watch, which is expected, Typhoon Kome is expected to make landfall in Shanghai later today.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of things going on the back of the tsunami. As you mentioned, the typhoon. We're still watching some of these flooding in Beijing and parts of China as well. So certainly weather is a key thing to watch across the day. Let's bring in, though, Dan Wang, a China director at the Eurasia Group, to tell us what happened in Sweden, right? 3 days of talks, or third round of talks, that had just wrapped up between the two nations. Dan Wang, what do you think of the key takeaways that came out of Stockholm? Where are we now?
So it looks like the mechanism established in London talk and Geneva talk actually is working. So the top leadership might meet by the end of this year, and that's a very positive sign. And both sides talk about the talks being constructive. But I believe, judging by the sentiment over the rare earth export control and over tariffs being eventually determined by Trump, we're probably looking at the peak China-US relationship. The relationship can deteriorate very quickly next year. But this year, it does look, the sentiment is warming up.
Yeah, and what does it tell you about the policy outlook in terms of policy support? So, the data's held up well, and it looks like, this relationship between the two, U.S. and China, seems to be holding up quite well. Is that negative for policy support expectations?
In a way, it is, because so far, China's export has been beating expectations, and the domestic economy seems to be holding up quite well. But if we look at the data more closely, the first half of the year, good performance was mainly concentrated between January and May. Major indicators in June started to collapse, including the transaction volume of housing. So we have to watch very closely in what's going on in the Politburo meeting next week, actually this week. And the central government may not have the appetite to roll out aggressive policies yet. But in August or September, they might have to pull out some of the bigger gun because the job market is getting pretty weak.
Dan, I want to get back to what you said just now, that perhaps we've just hit the peak of the U.S.-China relationship after Geneva, after Stockholm. I mean, you're starting to see the U.S. really try, to make the efforts to try to smooth out these trade deals, right? Whether it's, freezing export tech curbs, whether it's stopping the stopover with Ching-te from Taiwan in the U.S. It seems like they really want a trade deal. What are you foreseeing next year where things could really deteriorate, and how is it going to play out?
Well, in terms of tariffs talk, probably China will get more concessions from the U.S., and it looks like the 20% of the tariffs related with fentanyl could go away, and both sides are quite hopeful in that front. But when it comes to other type of competitions, especially in technology, there is no sign of any fundamental improvement. So next year, we might be looking at this new normal that tariff rate on China is permanently lower than what we see now. But other tech export control, including additional financial sanction or financial control targeting China, could be in fact strengthened. So for China, this is not necessarily good news, since the structural reform in China is more or less stalled, and the government really needs to find out a way to figure out how to help the housing market and real estate developers.
Right, and maybe just one last question on that before we talk about the structural issues, including anti-involution. How are Chinese companies right now navigating the uncertainty around where tariffs are going to be, to your point, lower next year? What's happening right now on the ground?
I have just finished a field trip in China, talking to a few dozens of Chinese companies with the U.S. market as their main destinations. It turns out that Chinese companies are quite resilient. Their response to tariffs are quite calm, and so far their exports and new orders are holding up quite well. So for Chinese companies, they do not believe that the transshipment tariffs in other countries like Vietnam, like Cambodia, like Indonesia could actually be enforceable. Many of the companies are getting more inventive over time by decomposing their final goods into different parts so they fit in different HS code, and by using different container ships and ship to different ports in the US and then reassemble in the US and become final product. So it is quite a common practice for Chinese companies to get around those tariffs. And for those destination countries like Cambodia, for example, there's not a willingness or capacity from the Stats Bureau or the Tax Bureau to really figure out the local content. So that's in China's favor. Overall, the supply chain resilience is still there. The real problem is actually whether the European market will be more stringent than China, and whether there will be more political pushback from the emerging markets over China's export.
What does that tell you about what export data is going to look like the next coming months, Dan? I mean, it seems like this has still been quite strong, quite resilient, maybe because we're in a trade truce right now. But how quickly can things really kind of deteriorate there?
Factories and companies or American buyers cannot front loading forever. In the first half of the year, they pretty much stocked up the whole year or at least 6 months of supply until Christmas. So in Q3, I can see this rising anxiety over China's export. It probably will enter the contraction territory. One counterpoint to that is that Chinese companies are still going global. So as more of them going out, setting up factories in different areas, they will import machinery, raw material, intermediate industrial goods. So that will be a short-term boost for China's exports. But still, the highest value added would be those final products targeting the US and European market.
All right. But Dan, while that's a good thing, the going global, that's not part of the domestic GDP equation. So my question is, what then takes place, or what then takes the place of exports, which have held up the growth rate? And how do you see the housing market?
The housing market is still far from reaching a bottom. And now our estimate is that probably around 2027, housing market will reach a meaningful bottom and start to turn around. And one reason is that the pent-up demand has been accumulating for a few years. Maybe by 2027, the demand will finally catch up with the supply. But there has been talks floating around about the hope that the central government could set up a housing fund or housing reserve fund in the Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae type of style of the housing national reserve to take over the excess inventory from the local government. If that happens, it will change the entire game. But so far, it just seems that the government has very little appetite in that front. They want to defend a politically minimum acceptable growth rate, which is about 4 to 4.5%. But to push the growth rate above that, that takes a lot more of determination to bail out the housing sector, which they still haven't shown willingness to do.
Dan, we have about 20 seconds left. I have to ask you about anti-involution. Is this going to work, and how?
Selling China short right now doesn't have a market. Anti-involution will not work in the next probably 4 to 8 months. But over time, the capital market will pick up the positive sentiment. And in a year or two, the real economy will respond. So I'm fairly positive over the impact of this in the long run.
Dan Wang, Eurasia Group, China Director there in Shanghai for us. The narrative won't save the real economy, but will benefit the capital market, which is something we have certainly seen recently. Thank you so much there for the time. Stay dry, of course, given the weather that is about to make landfall later today. Futures are looking like this. Leo in focus will tell you why in a moment. And we'll leave you with a look at Shanghai, of course, where a typhoon is set to make landfall later today. Plenty more ahead. You're watching The China Show. Good morning.
We're watching the EV sector here this morning on the back of what we saw in the Li Auto. ADRs were basically collapsing overnight there. It seems like investors might be taking profits from the recent share price rally, the launch of this i8 model. Morgan Stanley says, hold on, this correction overdone, they say. Focus a little bit more on pricing of this i8 and really the pre-order conversion the following days. But yes, there you go. EV sector is falling. The open is next. This is Bloomberg.
Welcome back. You're watching The China Show. We're counting down to the open. We're also looking at things that are unfortunately set to make landfall. Number one is a typhoon in Shanghai expected today. We're also looking at live pictures north of Japan after this massive 8.7 earthquake in Russia. Tsunami warnings all around, including Hawaii, parts of the western coast of the United States and Canada, and in Japan, of course, Tokyo Bay. And we are being told to expect a tsunami there, possibly as high as 3 meters. So we'll keep an eye on that as well.
Yeah, Osaka Prefecture and Inner Tokyo Bay remain covered by this tsunami advisory here this morning as well. So we'll continue to bring you updates there once we do see it. But certainly it is one thing to watch. Dollar yen certainly has been reacting. It is perhaps a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, but we are seeing a stronger yen this morning. You take a look at how the open in China is looking up there today. And you are seeing, again, it's pretty quiet when it comes to onshore markets. Shanghai is just flat at 3,600 level as well. But we are still seeing a little bit of resurgence here, a reversal on some of the commodities sort of correction. Or that's a bit of a strong word. But yes, some things will pull back there. But we are seeing now steel rebar is up once again. Iron ore, Shanghai crude there on the back of some of the geopolitical headlines that we're seeing around Russia really has been reacting to the oil price and what oil traders are pricing in right now. So that's something that to watch there. But then again, it's still, we're getting into the earnings season in Hong Kong as well. So we're watching the likes of CATL, HSBC, the like. So we'll get a flavor, everything from, the EV sector to banks. There you go. Hong Kong is certainly feeling it here today. We're hit by about 1% to the downside for the Hang Seng. HSBC is down some 2%. I believe it's the EV sector that's dragging that lower, I want to say.
Should be.
Should be. But there you go. HSBC is a standalone one that's, in terms of your large caps, that is actually still in the green here this morning. But Alibaba is down 2.5%. Baidu as well. Meituan, Xiaomi has seen some pretty sizable moves to the downside as well. The EV sector, right? So we talked about this i8 model that Li Auto just launched. It seems like people are just kind of buying the rumor, selling the fact, maybe, but maybe it's time to book some profit, some say, after this sort of massive rally that we're seeing in some of these EV stocks, Dave. Okay,
some data to tell you about 2Q numbers, inflation coming out of Australia. So looking at a softer inflation print there. 0.7 quarter-on-quarter. Trimmed mean CPI also coming in a touch lower than estimates. And as you can see, the Aussie dollar is now weaker on the back of that. And also stronger is the equity market extending those gains post the CPI numbers, which did come through as well. Yeah, so as far as that's concerned, the next RBA meeting is coming up, I believe, in about 2 weeks. Let me just check my date. Yep, August 12th. So that's about 2 weeks from now. And we're looking at, a softer inflation print coming through there in Oz.
Yeah, in terms of the movers, we're watching some of these delivery firms here this morning as well. So we did get some news that China is summoned some of these delivery companies here on excessive competition. So it's not just the food delivery sort of companies now. We're talking about ZTO Express, YTO Express, Yunda Holding, and STO Express that were summoned in this meeting. So there you go. You are seeing anti-involution as part of it as well. 10% gains for STO Express this morning. Chinese banks and insurance is also one to watch. Given what we heard from also regulators, push to curb cutthroat rivalry in finance, according to some reports as well. We are seeing slight downside for some of these financials here today, and it's really about the EV story, right? So Li Auto, as we talked about, was down some 9% in the pre-market. So i8 launch, that seems to be the trigger. So the price slightly beat expectations, according to Morgan Stanley, but the market debate is really focused on now the competitiveness of the hardware specs. So there you go. We're seeing the stock down some 11% right now. Morgan Stanley is saying, hold your horses here. This correction might be a bit overdone right now if you're looking to book some profits there. They're saying they're mostly positive on the pricing and advise watching the pre-order conversion in the following days. So don't be too scared just yet, according to Morgan Stanley, Dave.
Yeah, although if you listen to them, you would have lost this money. Although maybe, okay, that's a longer-term outlook. Of course, thank you. Yeah. The context is important there. They are certainly racing to the downside, also competing, if you will, there to the downside. Okay, let's get more on the EV sector and what's taking place. Let's bring in Linda Liu, of course, our Asia transport reporter, here with us on set to talk us through. CATL, of course, is the big earnings on deck today. What to expect there?
So analysts are actually expecting CATL to post quite healthy growth in their sales despite all this turbulence in global trade. That's coming on from demand due to some popular models from its customers like Xiaomi. We've seen just an absolute surge in demand for the latest SUV from Xiaomi, which some of its versions will use CATL's batteries, as well as other customers in Geely that are also selling really well. We're also seeing EV demand pick up in big markets like Europe. So the majority of batteries for EVs exported from China to the Europe actually come from CATL. So all of those help to boost CATL's sales. But profits and operating margins will remain under pressure because there's an intense EV price war going on in the Chinese market, and we're still kind of seeing this fallout from trade tensions globally.
I was going to get your take on what's happening with Li Auto. Is this just a matter of just profit taking, or do you think there is concerns around this whole i8 launch now?
I think with the i8 launch, Li Auto definitely has a lot riding on this because this is a SUV they're hoping to compete with an upcoming model from Tesla that I think reports are suggesting are also going to be 6 seats. So definitely they are trying to take some of their market share. They are under a lot of pressure to keep their sales up. They've already had to downgrade some of their outlook. So I think the pressure is riding on how the i8 is going to perform.
Okay, Linda, thank you. Our Asia transport reporter, Linda Liu there. On, of course, all these price moves that we're seeing in the EV sector, I've got to get the latest here when it comes to this earthquake. So an 8.8 magnitude earthquake has just been reported here. This is about 120 kilometers northeast Russia. So we're still feeling some of this here today as well. And as we've been talking about, that tsunami advisor has been upgraded to a warning now in Japan.
Yeah, it's at the same area where the initial strong one, well, this is stronger than based on the current data coming out. The initial one hits, what time is it now? I would say just over an hour back, an 8.7 hitting very far east of the country, and following that, a series of 5 to 6, high 6 magnitude quakes have hit, and now we understand another 8.8 earthquake has hit in that similar part. Separately, but related to that, is we are in tsunami watch, where we are getting some lines coming through out of the Japanese Prime Minister that they are confirming still that whether or not there will be an impact here from a tsunami. We'll get you guys more details on that. I'm not sure if you're seeing anything else here.
It's not just Japan, right? We talk about what's happening in, of course, the likes of Chile, Ecuador, Guam. They're under some of these sort of tsunami warnings and advisories here right now. Hawaii has been the latest. So Maui County has issued this evacuation orders amid this tsunami threat. So it is all around the coast that we're watching this really, the impact there. So now we're getting a little bit more alerts when it comes to the Chile coast. So they also are confirming that tsunami alert for the Chilean coast after this earthquake as well.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out, the last time we had something almost nearly as strong, if not stronger, of course, was back in the 2011, in March 2011 there, which hit, of course, the north part of Japan, which resulted, of course, in not just tsunamis, of course, in the following months and years, of course, the fallout there from the Fukushima nuclear plant, not to, of course, just bring that back for no reason at all, but it's certainly, you're looking at live pictures at about the same part of the country on the left side of your screens. That is the northern part of Japan, where, by the way, very near to that area, generally speaking, is where these massive earthquakes have been hitting.
Yep. Remember Tohoku Electric, right? Saying no tsunami impact to its Onagawa nuclear plant. Yeah. That's the update that came a couple minutes ago. But also, when you talk about flights, right? So we've heard that Sendai Airport has suspended their flights there on the tsunami warning as well. So it is impacting overall the travel side of things as well. So that's just the latest right now.
Okay. NHK just reporting right now that Japan has detected a tsunami in Hokkaido, 30 cm. 30 cm, just for context there, that's a very important context there out of NHK. So this is something that we will continue to track. This is happening quite literally as we speak. It is a developing story. Live pictures of Hokkaido on the left, and for our Bloomberg clients, that's a map, of course, of the earthquakes coming through. And the large red circles that you see on your screens indicates, of course, where in the world that's taking place, and the larger the circle, the stronger the earthquake that has hit there so far. Okay, for now, I don't see any more updates here. We can move things along very quickly and talk about, so we just ended on earnings there with CATL. Also coming out later today is HSBC. 2Q numbers are set to come out. Bloomberg Intelligence thinks that the bank, along with other banks in Hong Kong, could actually face some macro risks in the second half, despite shares rebounding from the April lows. We're now currently at 101.20 there on HSBC here in Hong Kong. Our finance reporter, Denise Wee, is here with us on set to talk us through what specifically to expect with this set of results coming in a couple of hours. Denise.
Well, we're expecting earnings to drop, pre-tax profits to drop about 20%, so weaker compared year on year. And basically, we're looking out for higher impairments. There's going to be a jump in impairment cost, bad loan provisions. Yeah. Investors be looking out for the Hong Kong commercial real estate sector, any guidance around that. Additionally, HIBOR's collapse in Hong Kong, so that's underpinning loans, mortgages. So we're expected to see some pressure on the margins. And last quarter, they did guide that they would take an impairment charge on BOCOM. So we could see some of that flowing through to the bottom line this quarter. In terms of share buybacks, Goldman is forecasting about $3 billion of share buybacks. So capital returns is another focus for the bank.
I want to get to your story, this interview that you did with Citigroup there. So they're planning to increase headcount in its Asia rates and prime businesses by 5 to 10% over the next year. What's driving that plan?
I think it's pretty much client activity. As we've seen, there's been a lot of renewed interest in Hong Kong IPO markets, China stocks. So they're seeing pretty strong international flows coming into Hong Kong market. So it's to deal with that client flow. In addition, also they've seen quant funds looking to access A-share market as well. So pretty much there's increased client flows and hedge fund activity.
Okay, Denise, thank you. Denise Wheeler, our finance reporter, bringing us that great interview as well as what to expect out of HSBC here today. And we're going to continue on. We have much more earnings ahead. Tomorrow we'll be joined exclusively by the Hang Lung Properties Chair, Adriel Chan. It's going to be at 9:30 a.m. right here on the show here in Hong Kong. Plenty more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
Welcome back. You're watching the China Show. More now on the developing story, of course, as pertains to China and U.S. and trade talks there, and certainly someone who has had a bad week, perhaps on the back of that broader conversation, is the Taiwanese president, Lai Ching-te, suffered a string of high-profile setbacks, of course, over the past week, wounding at his leadership at home and abroad. This U.S. tariff deadline, of course, looming, and things could get worse. For more on this, let's bring in Ian Lee, joining us from Taipei this morning. Yeah, well, good morning, and thank you for coming on the show. Tell us about all these setbacks and give us context there.
Hi, yeah, sure. So last Saturday in Taiwan, a recall election aimed at removing opposition lawmakers from office ended in a landslide defeat for President Lai. And, the opposition lawmakers have been, giving very hard time for President Lai, and they've been boycotting, government budget proposals, including the crucial military spending that President Lai has pledged to increase to over 3% of GDP of the island. Yeah, and shortly after that, the U.S. government also rejected, Taiwan's request for President Lai to have stopovers in the U.S. on his way to visit diplomatic allies in Central and South America. So, things are, getting very, very embarrassing for President Lai domestically and also on international stage.
Yeah, you say wounding his presidency at home and abroad, Ian. What does the remainder of his term look like then? What are people expecting?
Yeah, so we have been seeing remarks or comments from President Lai, who said that everyone has to accept the results of the recall votes. And as for the transit visits, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Taiwan and also the presidential office have said that they have never announced any plan for the president to have any overseas visits, and so there's no postponement and no cancellation or no denial of transits or whatsoever from the U.S. So they've been trying to downplay this embarrassing situation for them.
Yeah. So what then are the possible outcomes here for these trade talks between Taiwan and the U.S. specifically?
Yeah. So I think this is something that's more concerning for most of the people here. And, with the looming deadline, for the trade talk on Friday, if Taiwan can't really get the tariff rates lower than 20%, then things will look even worse for President Lai. I mean, Taiwan was hit by President Donald Trump with the 32 tariff rates on Liberation Day, and people were actually expecting Taiwan to be among the first wave of the countries to see the tariff announcements. But after at least four rounds of the trade talks so far, we still haven't seen any rates announced for Taiwan. So, with the regional peers like Japan and Vietnam getting tariff rates between 15 to 20%, so people are expecting that anything more than 20% will be another defeat for the president.
Yan, thank you. Yan Lee there, our Taipei EcoGov reporter, joining us there with the latest. Another news this morning, Blackstone has confirmed that a top executive in its real estate business was killed in yesterday's shooting at its Manhattan headquarters. Wesley LePatner was CEO of Blackstone REIT and a 43-year-old mother of two. She was among four people killed in the shooting, including a police officer and security guard. Law enforcement officials say the gunman was targeting the NFL headquarters in the same building, but went to the wrong floor. Oil prices are in focus after President Trump says he's giving Russia until August 8th to agree to a Ukraine ceasefire or face tariffs and possible secondary sanctions. Trump had originally set a 50-day deadline, which would have fallen in early September. He also says he's not concerned about oil market fallout because the U.S. can ramp up its own energy production. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer says Britain will recognize Palestine in September unless Israel agrees to a ceasefire with Hamas. He says Israel must also commit to a peace process that would result in a Palestinian state. The decision follows similar plans from France and signals a sharp diplomatic shift. Israel condemned the announcement, calling it a reward for terrorism.
Okay, let me get to an update here of this massive earthquake and the fallout. We're continuing to see. We have a look at some of the Japan power producers, and it's almost really bad flashbacks of our coverage 14 years ago. Kansai Electric has halted a unit at its Gobo power plant on a tsunami warning, to be more specific. It's a warning. A couple of minutes back, NHK reported that they had detected a tsunami in Hokkaido, 30 cm. As far as the height is concerned. A few minutes before that, another massive earthquake hit, 8.8 magnitude, same part of Far East Russia. And also along around the timeline, Maui County has issued evacuation orders amid the tsunami threat. And also along the last few minutes or so, Chile has also issued a similar tsunami warning and alert after a very strong series of earthquakes in far eastern Russia. Plenty more ahead here on The China Show.
All right, we're going to talk about IFlytek for a second here. The stock of the AI company has been under pressure this year and really kind of bucking this rally that we've seen among Chinese tech, which was triggered by, of course, that optimism around DeepSeek. Now, speaking to us exclusively in Shanghai, the CFO, Duan Dawei, told us why he thinks this isn't a cause for concern.
If you're talking about the price of shares, from my experience, the entrepreneurs should not keep their eyes on the share markets every day and every minute. They should care about the customers, care about product, care about technology.
What have been the headwinds that you face as a company?
The short term, a lot of, for example, maybe currently the macroeconomy also have some pressure, and also the trend of the technology, also the competition also very tight. So a lot of short-term factors. We need to notice those short-term factors, but we also, more important, we need to focus on the long-term factors.
IFlytek is now looking into international markets, which I understand you are also responsible for looking after as well. Which markets are you prioritizing in particular?
It's hard to say which market is the priority for our target, because in current stage, we think that artificial intelligence, the industry, is still not mature.
Which countries, though, are you looking toward?
If from the culture and the easy for travels, for transportation, we looking the Asian market is more closer to us. So currently, our business in Korea, in Japan, and also the other Asian countries is increased. But in the long-term run, we think the more and more countries, they need to copy some experience and models from China.
And that was the IFlytek CFO, Duan Dawei, there speaking exclusively with Animal Jewelers in Shanghai.
Okay, an update of the precautions that are taking place in Hokkaido and the north of Japan here on the back of that. A series of very, very strong earthquakes, 8.8 in Russia, very near, of course, that part of the country. TEPCO's Tokyo Electric has now put out a statement that they have evacuated some staff from Fukushima plants, plural, on the tsunami warning. It's not clear whether this is the Fukushima Daiichi plant that, of course, for some of you that might remember, following the earthquake in 2011, but we'll just underscore that they have evacuated staff from Fukushima plants on that specific warning, and among the many, many things we've been tracking this hour.
Yep, so certainly you're seeing the precautions, and people are really kind of bracing for maybe what sort of impact could come. But what we've heard so far is that maybe the waves are about 30 centimeters. So that's certainly interesting to have that context here, right? NHK initially was saying we could be expecting up to 3 meters height in terms of tsunami waves. But right now we are seeing their NHK detecting 30 centimeter tsunami there in Hokkaido. We talk about some of the flights have been suspended. Sendai Airport also has been doing that this morning. But yes, as you talk about it, it's not just a Japan story, Dave. It's something that really has gone global around the world.
Yeah, Chile. We're looking at a tsunami warning there across their coast as well, towards the northern part, Canada, western coast of the United States. Tsunami advisory, I believe, is the more apt descriptor there. In Hawaii, though, where things are, let's say, more front and center, let's put it that way, Maui County has issued evacuation orders amid that tsunami threats. And so we will continue to update you as well. Japan, as we speak, is continue to ensure or trying to get more details on this, whether or not a tsunami is in fact going to impact, or tsunami impact on Japan. We'll be live out of Tokyo coming through in the second hour of the China Show. Dollar yen on the way down. Some breaking news this hour. More ahead. This is Bloomberg.
Welcome back to the China Show. Here's a look at the CSI 300, the half hour into the session here. We're seeing a slight upside here, but then again, watching the raindrops on our dash cam there when it comes to our Shanghai live shot. So we're expecting some sort of typhoon to make landfall as well there, of course, as we continue to track what's been going on in Japan, too.
Yeah, we're going to turn the page on the live shot and also the graphic that's coming up. Dollar yen coming up, of course. The live shot out of the northern part of Japan, I believe still in Hiroo, in Hokkaido, where it seems, and we're looking at some live pictures there, I don't want to speculate, so I'll leave that for now. But yes, just to update you guys, following an 8.7 magnitude earthquake, which hit, I would say, about 90 minutes back in far eastern Russia, in the same area, another 8.8 earthquake was reported to have hit about 20 minutes back. And following that, a series of Japanese corporates have come out and updated us, including the power producers, TEPCO, the latest one, to say that it has evacuated staff from its Fukushima plants on the back of these tsunami warnings.
Let's bring in John Herskovitz, who joins us live from Tokyo here this morning with the latest. John, maybe you could clarify with us, has a tsunami hit yet? Can you just kind of give us an update?
Sure. In Japan, there has been a reported tsunami of 30 centimeters at one part of Hokkaido, Japan's northernmost island. On Japanese television, there's been some footage from Russia which indicates a tsunami has hit parts of the region. What is forecast for Japan, or what the meteorological agency has warned of, is of a tsunami of up to 3 meters, and the warning stretches for large parts of Japan's Pacific coast. From Hokkaido through most of Honshu. This is an area that includes the Tokyo metropolitan area, the Osaka metropolitan area. So what is likely to happen is that over the next 2 hours, the tsunami, if it will be going down the Japanese coast, but so far the only reported incidence has been the one in Hokkaido of 30 centimeters.
Yeah, we're getting more aftershocks as well in the general area in Russia. So following the 8.8, I'm counting at least 4 or 5 magnitude earthquakes hitting, 5.5, 5.4, 5.5, and the latest one, 5.6, coming through out of the USGS. John, the reason I bring that up is this a region that's actually prone to tsunamis, and what impact could that have, especially in Japan, as we were just talking about there?
Sure. Japan is prone to tsunamis. It's prone to earthquakes. In 2011, the Tohoku, the northeastern region of Japan, was hit by that devastating earthquake, tsunami, and the nuclear disaster at Fukushima. A lot of this region, or almost all this region, has been rebuilt, and there's seawalls along the coast in this region. This is the region where the tsunami is going to hit next. So there are a lot of protections in place for the Tohoku region. But we've seen some things taking place already. Sendai Airport has suspended flights because of this. Tokyo Haneda's airport, which is in a low-lying area, the flights are still going as planned. So lots of preparations going on, but the government is warning people in the low-lying areas on the coast, which is home to tens of millions of people, to, if they're in these areas, to think about, they're advising them to leave these areas. So it's a concern. We're seeing the first bits of it, and we'll see how it goes from here. But over the next 90 minutes to 2 hours, it should play out on Japan's coast. And the warning is for huge areas through Hawaii and other parts of Asia.
John, can you tell us at this point what we know in terms of damage or even injuries?
On the Japan side, nothing has been reported in terms of injury or damage. And as the tsunami goes down the coast, we're going to see it hit areas where there have been large protections put in place after the 2011 tsunami. So far, nothing has been reported, but the brunt of the tsunami hasn't hit the most heavily populated and developed areas of Japan yet. So nothing yet, but we'll see how it plays out over the next 90 minutes to 2 hours.
And let's hope it stays that way. Yes. John, thank you so much. John Herskovitz, there, our East Asia government editor, with the latest out of Tokyo for us. To our other top story that we're tracking today, the U.S. and China have wrapped up their meetings in Stockholm with no deal to extend a tariff truce. You have Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent saying that President Trump will make that final call.
We don't want to decouple. We just need to de-risk with certain strategic industries, whether it's the rare earth, semiconductors, medicines, and we talked about what we could do together to get into balance within the relationships.
And Min Lo, our China correspondent, is here with us to get us up to speed on the details. So no deal, but there's a way forward, it seems.
Yes, so the decision now lies with President Trump. He is awaiting an update from Scott Bessent, and then he will decide whether or not to extend that trade truce. But both sides had described the talks as pretty constructive, candid, productive. So the mood music is pretty positive here. And President Trump also said that he is going to meet with President Xi by the end of the year, really reversing what he said yesterday when he tweeted out on Truth Social saying he wasn't seeking a summit. So now he's acknowledging that that summit is going to happen. So pretty positive note here. But we know that rare earths was at the center of the discussion. Jamie Sangria said he never wants to talk about it again. It's case closed. He said that this was the biggest concession that China has given to the U.S. They promised to keep those rare earths flowing. When it comes to the Section 232 tariffs, he was asked about that. But the U.S. for now is saying that no countries will be exempted from those sectoral tariffs if they do get announced further down the line. But of course, there is the Ukraine war in focus as well. China's purchase of these Russian oil has been in focus. Scott Bessent had been warning the Chinese about potential secondary sanctions, perhaps even as high as 100%. And this is one of the more intractable areas because it's going to be very disruptive for China to cut their oil import from Russia. Russia is their biggest crude oil source of crude oil, and this is where things were left a little bit open, and possibly where there is the biggest opportunity is perhaps when it comes to the fentanyl-related tariffs, whether or not those tariffs will be lowered down further down the line.
It seems like we really just need a Trump-Xi summit to finally get something done. Are we laying the pathway for that now? How close are we?
Yeah, well, at least now there is a confirmation that this summit is going to happen. There is no time frame. We could possibly be still quite far away from that. But it looks like, President Trump given his love for showmanship, for deal making, he may want to announce the bigger details of a trade agreement when they finally meet. And there seems to be two camps here. There are those who say that, this could be a sign that there would be a grand bargain when they meet, not just, resolving the trade issues, but perhaps something that relates to, greater investments in manufacturing and energy, resolving the TikTok issue, maybe even some behind the scenes discussion on how to resolve the Taiwan conflict as well. And then on the other camp, you have, for example, Dan Wang from Eurasia Group saying that this is the peak of U.S.-China relations. It's warming up now, but it's going to get worse later. Perhaps the most we'll get is a lowering of those fentanyl-related tariffs, but those issues around tech curbs, the strategic competition with China, the financial sanctions on China, that's not going to stop. So it's really hard to say, given the lack of more details on on what else was discussed during the trade talks.
The collateral damage, at least one of it, has been Taiwan. Just help us understand how the fallout has showed up in the Taiwan conversation.
Yeah, one of the signs that we got earlier on was that reportedly the U.S. had failed to greenlight President Lai Ching-te's trip to the U.S. in a layover to other countries. And that was the first sign that perhaps the U.S. might be potentially trading away Taiwan as a bargaining chip to reach its broader China policy goals. And right now, Lai Ching-te is having a very difficult time in Taiwan because they just had a recall vote over the weekend. And the DPP, the ruling party, really lost in a big defeat there, which shows that the Taiwanese people really wants to continue to maintain this current balance of power. And bear in mind, Lai Ching-te already won his presidential election with the slimmest majority since 2020. And right now, Taiwan is also trying to reach a trade deal with the U.S. to reduce the potentially 32% tariff that could kick in August. So far, no news yet, although sources are saying that U.S. has promised a most preferred rate without specifying what the number could be, but presumably it will be something similar to what Japan and Europe has gotten, which is 15%. But, that's not happening yet, and all signs point to the questions of whether Taiwan can really rely on the U.S. at this point.
Yeah, I think Yan, our colleague in Taipei, was saying if we get 20% or even higher, that means that could be a disappointment on Taiwan's side of things. Min Lo, thank you, our China correspondent there with the latest. There's more on trade coming up. The former Canadian Trade Minister, Mary Ng, joins today's Insight to discuss Ottawa's down-to-the-wire negotiations with the U.S. is at the top of the next hour.
Yeah, if you think about it, India, Taiwan, Canada,
South Korea. Still a lot.
Still a lot, and these are places where are more aligned with the U.S. and seem to be on the back burner as far as priorities. Is that a question mark, right, where the U.S. is concerned? But such is the way the world works, and such is the importance of China, I guess, to underscore that point. Vicki Chi joins us as well here to talk us through what that means for Asian equity markets, which, by the way, have done exceptionally well going into these trade talks. Despite it, amidst it, plenty more ahead. This is Bloomberg. Okay, welcome back. So a quick glance at, a couple of things, right? So you have a Fed decision coming out, number one. The here and now, this massive earthquake in Russia, a pair of 8.7, 8.8 dollar-yen, as you can see on the screens. Coming up shortly on your screens is the state of equity markets, which, by the way, when you look at the current pricing, I mean, yes, the last few days has seen a pullback. It's been a great year, though, for equity markets. In fact, I think we're up 50%, on the Hang Seng Index over 12 months, right? So 25,000 right now. MSCI China's at 81. And it's not just the Chinese markets. Korea's done well. Japan has done well. Within this, we'll talk about Macau later on as a separate sector in this market. So what do we do now? Do we just sit and enjoy the tailwinds? Joining us here on set is equities portfolio manager at Robeco, Vicki Chi. Good morning. You have a big smile on your face.
Good morning.
Is it a reflection of how good the year has been for you guys?
I think so, yes. and definitely happy for the clients as well.
Oh, okay. So how much money I have a very simple question. Hong Kong has done very well. Southbound, we've been focusing on that. How much money has entered this Hong Kong market? Are you feeling that as a portfolio manager?
I think the sense is that many of the global money begin to come back to this region, and we haven't seen that for a very long time. So Hong Kong has definitely been, let's say, the first stop of this liquidity reversal back to the region. So we definitely welcome that very much.
The AH share premium seems to be not much of a premium anymore. It continues to narrow. But you've been looking at overall, in general. What is the picture now, really?
That's one of the interesting phenomena that in the past 3 years, the discounts for the H shares versus A shares has been basically expanding continuously until the first half of this year. So we've seen a discount narrowing, but actually comparing, if you look at the 3-year horizon, many of the discounts are still deeper compared to 3 years ago. So southbound participation and support as a liquidity provider in this Hong Kong market has definitely been one of the main drivers. And if you look at the list of stocks with huge discounts, there are still quite a lot. So especially those with good dividend yield support should continue to see this discount narrowing.
Are there any specific risks to the big drivers of returns or the big winners so far that you're at least watching for now, given how good things have been?
I think definitely at this stage, stock selection would become even more important. I think valuation is, again, a point of focus. But I think more fundamentally is that through the AI and technology developments in many of the sectors in China, there is a fundamental change of view on how much the future earnings would develop for many of these companies. So I think for longer-term investors, for longer-term stock picking, that would be the next step. Focus is to differentiate the companies with sustainable longer-term earnings delivery versus, let's say, the short-term rallies and excitements.
How visible is that in China right now?
I think that has become much more visible now compared to half a year ago.
Okay.
Of course, valuation has partly reflected that. But in the technology heavy sectors, so you're talking about whether that's software, whether that's part of the manufacturing, but also very much in healthcare, which is also a technology heavy sector. Many of these businesses are slowly changing and starting to be recognized as having a much better longer term outlook.
And you mentioned, I think even 6 months ago, before even DeepSeek was sort of a household name, was to focus on software. Is that still the case?
That is still the case, and many of these ideas have done really, really well this year. But if you look at, for example, even the mega cap internet stocks in China, they are still trading at a very big discount compared to their global counterparts. So for me, what's interesting is that the next step, while everybody is focusing on the trade discussions, and that is very much on the physical trade, I think the interesting thing would be the services exports that's potentially coming up. So for many of these Chinese internet companies, if they have a very significant international presence, this part of the business is typically very undervalued compared to their global counterparts. So I think a lot of these perspectives are not really being looked at, but now with the global flow coming back to this region, I think many of the international investors would be looking at these companies again and discover that there are many interesting and exciting prospects for them that is not being really recognized as part of the local investment community.
Yeah, that's interesting, the opportunities outside China, because people usually talk about the big platform companies, the big tech companies, and they look at domestic revenue growth. They don't really look at outside. So I guess my question, how material do you think that will be for these companies in terms of being able to figure out, is this a proper valuation? It's still a small part of the business, but it could grow. How are you looking at that?
So we're still in the seeding stage if you look at many of the companies' investments. So a lot of them are very active in ASEAN, they're active in Latin America, they're active in the Middle East. Many of these companies have presence there. They have actually significant businesses, but they typically don't generate a lot of profit yet. So that's why people typically focus on the domestic business, as that's mostly where the earnings are coming from now. So the question is, how do you look at them? Do you think that their international businesses have actually a strong footing to be sustainable profit drivers? And I think that is probably going to be very important in the coming, let's say, 2 to 3 years. You can see that they can actually ramp up monetization and improve the cost structures overseas.
Okay, so eventually this is going to be a more of a key part in how people look at this. But domestically, we're still talking about something called anti-involution, right? What are you seeing in terms of the potential, returns on this, the impact on earnings and margins, and what sectors actually are going to benefit from this sort of effort?
I think the government's attitude is very clear. They want companies to manage their costs better. They want them to generate profits. But this time around, it's a bit difficult. So I think in the markets, you've seen that upstream stocks rallied a lot. Excitement around, let's say, steel, cement, the usual suspects in the upstream sectors. But if you look at capacity cuts, we're talking about 5%, maximum 10%. And these SOE-controlled sectors, I don't think is the real focus this time around, right? So I think managing private companies to stop them from over-competing against each other is a much more tough job and much different task compared to control SOEs to cut capacity. So eventually, I think where the regulator would focus on to stop this over-competition would be to improve the legal structure, help the companies to establish proper intellectual property protection, to stop this commoditized pricing competition.
Yeah.
So I think that would be needed, but I think we're not there yet to reach the purpose. But I think the government is very busy trying to achieve that.
Yeah. Markets have responded to that already, I think is the point. And I think the question to you, I think you've answered that it's difficult to see how the rally can continue even further given it's a very hard proposition to model, let's put it that way. I want to ask you about what else is going on in the region. Japan, of course, has done well, I mean, surprisingly well up until, recently was range-bound and then did well following the last two developments, their politics. How are you looking at Japan as a driver for strategies these days?
Yeah, so we continue to focus on stock selection very much in Japan. And same way also actually in Korea as well. So we're seeing defense and, let's say, the global capex for electricity grids. Some of these global developments continues to spread out in Asia. So many of the Asian companies that are participating in these mega trends globally continues to deliver alpha for our portfolios. So for investors, I think, again, it's important to keep the global perspective because in Asia we have many of these underdiscovered and undervalued opportunities in these supply chains that are very much actively supplying into these mega trends globally. So that's how we're looking at some of these investment opportunities.
And you also actually added Korea before the political turmoil. What do you think has changed now that we have a new president? He seems to be very forceful in terms of carrying out some of these campaign pledges when it comes to AI, when it comes to corporate reforms and the like. What's changed, do you think, in Korea now?
I think previously when we talk about the Value Up program, is always kind of a hope in Korea, and I think we have come a long way in terms of making that much more tangible for investors. Now that many of these stocks have rallied, we've seen a dramatic improvement in price to book, so showing investors expectation ROE improvement for many of these corporates. The next step would be execution. So I think we probably expect some noise, some kind of consolidation in some of these ideas. But we do believe that once the government and the corporates come into action, there should still be a lot of opportunities in Korea as that remains to be still a very cheap market.
So we've done well, let's call it the last 7 months in 2020. What's the outlook this year? And I'm going to throw in a macro question. Global economy seems to be cooling, and I'm wondering if you're concerned over that, or do the idiosyncratic factors continue to lift stocks?
I think the first half of this year, in terms of the fundamentals, when we think about the potential of trade wars in the beginning of the year, I think the first half has been, exceptionally well, both in terms of fundamentals and share price performance. In the second half of the year, if the trade impact materializes, then actually I think fundamentally we would start to see some of the, let's say, expected negatives to come through. Okay. So I think on a half-on-half basis, we probably see quite some uncertainties in terms of numbers. But I think coming back to our region, we have still very strong balances across the board. Okay. And governments, so new governments in place and very willing to support the economy. Yeah. So from that perspective, I think our region with a weakening dollar should stand very well.
Vicki, thank you, Vicki Chi, there, Equities Portfolio Manager at Robeco. We got plenty more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
Right, welcome back. So a couple of updates here. Number one is out of Japan, no reports of abnormality at nuclear facilities. That's a good thing. Let's hope it remains that way. Taiwan's got an update on their front. Taiwan expects a tsunami to affect the island from 1:18 p.m. Local time. That's according to the Central Weather Admin. And in Indonesia, they have just issued an early warning for a tsunami there in Sulawesi, in Maluku. Plenty more ahead, more details ahead. This is Bloomberg.
Just want to bring you up to speed on the latest on this tsunami after this earthquake in Russia. So we are hearing the likes of Indonesia in just the last couple of minutes issuing that early warning for tsunami in Sulawesi and Maluku. President Trump in the U.S. has also been talking about the tsunami watch in effect for Alaska as well, also for those living in Hawaii. So that has come through in the last couple of minutes as well, as President Trump, of course, has returned home after going to Scotland. So certainly that's one to watch. Taiwan also in the last couple of minutes expecting tsunami to affect the island later on this afternoon. 1:18 p.m. is the time that the Central Weather Administration has issued here right now. And so that's the latest there. We are going to see continuing what goes on in Japan. You know, so far we've only heard about 30-centimeter height waves have reached there, but certainly that's the latest when we heard from NHK. We're waiting for some sort of update there. But Dave, certainly one to watch. And really, we're seeing it almost across the world right now, the effects from this earthquake.
Yeah, and we'll continue to update our viewers and our clients, of course, on what's going on there. So certainly, as Yvonne is pointing out, Japan, Chile, Hawaii, Taiwan. I'm looking at some of my social media feed. The Philippines is also expecting tsunamis there as well. And again, it's hard to underscore also the size of the tsunamis is still not clear at the moment. So this looks to be a story we'll continue to track over the next few hours or so. We'll update you guys in a moment here. In the meantime, though, just to focus on Macau, we talked about some of the drivers of this equity market rally. And really, when you look at Macau, the stocks itself, I'll show you how that's really outperformed of late. But before we get to that, though, so data yesterday showed just under 90% hotel occupancy. Big picture, though, you take a step back. What the chart shows you is yearly growth in overnight stays measured by the number of people. So it measures the number of people. On average, monthly, we're looking at about, currently it's about 1.2. The chart goes all the way back to 2003. Just under 10% annual is the average from 2003, early 2000s, to about when the pandemic hit, which is quite clear. Now, if the pandemic didn't hit, if you extrapolate that 10% a year, this should be in the order of, this should be at about 1.8 to 2 million. As you can see, we have recovered to pre-pandemic levels. We haven't recovered to pre-pandemic trend, which is something separate. The question, though, is, are we operating in a new normal? And our revenues back to the point that this doesn't even matter at this point in time when you look at markets. In fact, when you look at markets specifically and how that's really outperformed, house wins. With the exception of healthcare, that's done exceptionally well. Macau casinos are number 2 when you look at some of the benchmarks and the sectors within MSCI China. So this measures it all the way back to March. From April 9, at that point in time, we're up 55%, Yvonne, on the Macau casino gauge. So suffice to say, it's a play on maybe dividends. It's a play on a recovery, transport, visas, all the good stuff that we talk about here on the show.
Jackie Chung, G-Dragon, all those sort of
Bruno Mars,
yeah.
Wasn't he there?
Well, that was...
Yeah. The Londoner, wasn't David Beckham there?
I mean, there's just a lot of celebs, right?
Yeah.
But yes, let's get the take from Jennifer Sona, our next guest. She sees further upside for some of these casino stocks, given the sector's favorable long-term outlook. Jennifer Song is the senior equity analyst at Morningstar. Jennifer, it's always great to have you, right? So, you know, we've been talking about, right? It's been up some 50%, some of these Macau casino operators, since the lows that were reached in April. You seem quite strong that, you know, have a lot of conviction that this uptrend can continue. What factors are you looking at in particular?
Okay, so the Macau's gaming demand has been quite strong in recent months. We see a couple of key drivers. Firstly, we see some new hotels in the market, which including Londoner Phase 2 and also the Capella from Galaxy and also new villas from MGM China. So these products are particular target for the premium customer, which are very high-end luxury hotels, and these are driving VIP and high-end premium mass gaming demand. Secondly, we also see the higher VIP hold rates and also the more aggressive credit offering from casino operators to their VIP clients. So these are also driving the GGR's trends. And in addition, definitely the non-gaming events, such as the very successful Jackie Chan's concert, as well as higher promotional costs from the casino operators. All these are driving the significant traffic to Macau. Yeah, this positive momentum will likely to extend in the second half.
Jennifer, David here. So among the other things that doesn't seem to get a lot of attention, things like transport links and the outlook for the visa regimes. Are you looking at those two things as possible drivers still of business into Macau?
Definitely, that will help for the convenience of traveling from mainland to Macau, because mainland tourists contributes about 70% of the overall visitations to Macau. So that definitely will help.
And in terms of what you think is going to be the winners here, I mean, it seems like it's floating a lot of these casino operators right now. There's this whole optimism around this recovery. But who stands out to you as ones that could actually be winners?
Okay, so actually for the second half, we are looking for those casinos have market share gain potentials and also the dividend upside. So in conclusion, we'll like Galaxy and also Sands China.
Okay, Sands just reported, and I think in a couple of weeks, of course, we'll get almost a repeat of those numbers coming through. Do you have any key takeaways as far as Sands is concerned? Because you mentioned Londoner, that's the new property, and I wonder whether you've also seen cannibalism between their properties because of this new baby that's out.
Yes. We see actually Sands China just migrate some premium client from its other property to boost the Londoner, the new Londoner. So we see the strong growth of Londoner, but quite weak of other smaller properties. So we think the company is taking some new strategy to boost the growth of other smaller properties, and also at the same time to drive the Londoner's growth. So in particular, the company will lift its promotional efforts. So that means the promotional cost will increase. Yeah, so that will driving a higher, stronger growth in the second half.
Okay, something that you've mentioned a couple of times already in the last few minutes, Jennifer, is the return of the premium customer. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that? How that... Because when someone tells me premium in Macau, I think about the VIPs and the high rollers from many years ago. And of course, is that returning, or is this returning in a different way?
Okay, actually, because Junker actually drew out the market. So part of the original Junker VIP client, they are switching to the premium mass or direct VIP client to the casinos. So, but the amount currently definitely very low compared with the pre-pandemic level. So according to the official data, we see the VIP GGR only accounts for like under 30% of under 30% of overall GGR, but before pandemic, the number will be about 45 to 50%. So definitely that is still low, but the growth is very fast, and also this part of demand are really driving the overall industry GGR. So we expect actually the VIP accounts for about 10% of overall industry GGR, but the premium mass accounts for 40 to 50% of the mass revenue for Macau. So that's really a large group for now.
Okay, so is the narrative then to focus on the VIPs really driving the rest of the year in second half? or should we still focus on mass market?
Actually, for casino operators, they are still focused on the premium mass. So when they build the hotels, they are quite premium luxury and are driving those premium mass demand, because base mass is pretty much linked with the overall China's overall economy. So it is still facing some challenges. So base mass growth is still quite slow at the moment.
Jennifer, what's the best, among these casino operators, what is the best dividend play?
The dividend play, actually, at the moment, they're just recovering. And at the moment, MGM China offers the highest dividend yield. It's about 3.8% at this level. Yeah, and the others are still recovering. Like since China, the dividend yield is about 2.7% at the moment.
Okay, and I think the next few weeks we'll see other casino operators report as well. Some of the dates are still TBC, but is there any one specific name you're tracking or one specific theme you think we should be paying attention to when these companies report results?
Okay, we would like to see Galaxy Macau's result. We want to see whether the new hotel will bring market share gain for the company. And also, we want to see whether MGM China will stay defensive to defend its market share. These two are particular we want to pay attention to.
Jennifer, thank you so much. Jennifer Song, Senior Equity Analyst there at Morningstar, on this winning trade so far and reasons why perhaps it continues there as far as the Macau casino trade is concerned. Okay, just an update here of the top story we've been tracking this morning. Live pictures out of Japan. An update separately, but the same story out of Taiwan here, that they do expect the tsunami to... let me have a look at that headline just to be exceptionally clear and accurate how they're...
1:18.
1:18 p.m. local time.
Yep.
And it is the tsunami to affect the island from that point in time. Other things taking place. Donald Trump, the U.S. president, is also has also put out something as far as this is concerned. It's a watch. Tsunami watch is in effect for Alaska. It has been front and center as far as Hawaii is concerned. The entire state and Maui County has in fact ordered evacuations there as well.
And from what we know so far, we haven't heard any sort of reports on damages just yet in Japan. We did hear from some officials. Hayashi-san is the chief cabinet secretary, spoke in the last 30 minutes or so. No reports of damage to essential services right now. So we'll continue to watch this one. But yes, we were continuing to see tsunami watches all around the world here. We'll give you an update after this break. Plenty more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
Right, welcome back. Something you may have missed is this 12% rally we're looking at in steel prices. Rebar specifically had the best day this year yesterday. As you can see, we're adding on to those gains. Iron ore is bottom of the screen. So two things are working out here as far as market themes. Number one is this mega dam project, which we'll get to in a moment. Second, of course, is anti-involution, and maybe the steel sector as the low-hanging fruit that might start to show the effects of that exercise. In fact, on the anti-involution, we've been asking our guests about that and what they really think will happen as far as that conversation goes, as far as the economy and also the markets. Have a listen.
Selling China short right now doesn't have a market. Anti-involution will not work in the next probably 4 to 8 months, but over time, the capital market will pick up the positive sentiment. And in a year or two, the real economy will respond. So I'm fairly positive over the impact of this in the long run.
Managing private companies to stop them from over-competing against each other is a much more tough job and much different task compared to control SOEs to cut capacity. So eventually, I think where the regulator would focus on to stop this over-competition would be to improve the legal structure, help the companies to establish proper intellectual property protection, to stop this commoditized pricing competition.
And you add that, right, to this whole theme of this big mega dam, right? And that's why you're seeing this massive rally underway. And construction officially began this month for that $167 billion mega dam in Tibet. And it's set to become one of the biggest infrastructure projects in history and a legacy-defining gamble for President Xi as he tries to revive China's slowing economy. Let's bring in Dan Murtaugh joining us from Beijing for more on today's Big Take. Dan, we talked about the scale of this big number of $167 billion price tag. But tell us a bit more how big of a gamble this is for President Xi, especially since he's really kind of using the old playbook to revive growth now.
Yeah, you know, it was just a couple years ago that people started to think that China's era of building big mega dams was over. You know, they had built 3 gorges, Baihetan, Wudongde, and, you know, there weren't really many places left, except for this one out in Tibet, the Yarling Tsangbo. But for many years, people thought this was kind of a pie-in-the-sky idea. It's very far away from anybody who, you know, lives or works. It's a long way to truck materials. You're up in the Himalayan mountains, and it's in a pretty seismically active zone, so there's some danger there too. But we have an economy now that is in need of stimulus. And so these two things are working together. And I guess the time was right, the Chinese government thought, to bring this project to fruition. And so now they're launching it. It's going to require, you know, as much cement as 60 Hoover dams, as much steel as 116 Empire State Buildings, you know, 200,000 workers perhaps. It's going to transform this sort of remote small corner of Tibet. There's going to be risks of ecological and environmental danger. But really, you know, China loves nothing more than a big mega project to get the country to sort of rally behind it and try to get out of an economic malaise. And that's what it's doing right now.
Yeah, I mean, to the point you were making, the short-term pump priming to this part of the country and the economy, not to even mention the longer-term growth this possibly unlocks because of, you know, simply because of that new power source. Dan, do we know more about what the sort of longer-term benefits are to that part of the country economically?
Yeah, you know, the nice thing about this project is, you know, it's not going to be one of those, you know, bridges to nowhere or the third airport in a small city in Guizhou. This is definitely going to have some value. It's going to be possibly as much as 70 gigawatts of carbon-free electricity. That's more than 3 times the Three Gorges Dam, which is currently the world's biggest power station. It's going to probably provide power all the way to Hong Kong, maybe even to your studio there, David. And, you know, it's going to do so for decades. It's going to take about 15 years to build, but you know, around that time is when it's going to be more and more difficult to absorb more solar and wind power into the Chinese grid. So when it comes on around the late 2030s, 2040, it's going to be sorely needed.
And sorely needed at a time when Beijing is really trying to rein in these price wars in the industrial sector, this whole anti-involution theme, it seems. This project sort of complements that in some way, Dan. So are we expecting more of these sort of infrastructure projects, a big push and moving forward?
That's the real big question right now. You know, the planners are all getting together this year to put together the next 5-year work plan, which will be announced at the NPC next March. And analysts are saying, you know, this might be the first domino to fall in a series of big infrastructure projects. You know, certainly as big as this dam is, when you look at China's overall industrial scale, you know, 6 million tons of steel is the high end of the estimate we've seen. That's, you know, China produces 1 billion tons of steel a year. So by itself, this isn't going to be able to completely reflate the economy in these industrial sectors. But if this is the signal that, you know, China is willing to put some fiscal stimulus behind its measures to rein in oversupply, then it really could sort of end this deflationary cycle that China's stuck in.
Dan, thank you so much. Dan Murtaugh there, our Bloomberg News reporter, and for our Bloomberg clients, NI Big Take Go. A lot of good graphics, a lot of good information, very important context there on today's take.
Yeah, as we talk about, right, the legacy of this means for President Xi and the like here, but also there's a lot of criticism around it, right? Obviously, when you talk about policies in Tibet, which has been a very sort of sensitive sort of area. Also, when it comes to what this means in India and how they view this whole infrastructure push as well. That certainly is going to be a big one. Make sure to check it out on the Big Take here today. In some of the world news that we're watching this morning, Shanghai is bracing for heavy rain a day after flooding killed at least 30 people in Beijing and cut power to villages. Storm Komei is expected to make landfall around China's financial capital on Wednesday, with hundreds of flights likely to be canceled. State media says the torrential downpour that soaked Beijing on Monday forced more than 80,000 people to leave their homes. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer says Britain will recognize Palestine in September unless Israel agrees to a ceasefire with Hamas. He says Israel must also commit to a peace process that would result in a Palestinian state. The decision follows similar plans from France and signals a sharp diplomatic shift. Israel condemned the announcement, calling it a reward for terrorism. Oil prices are in focus after President Trump said he's giving Russia until August 8th to agree to a Ukraine ceasefire or face tariffs and possible secondary sanctions. Trump had originally set a 50-day deadline, which would have fallen in early September. He also says he's not concerned about oil market fallout because the U.S. can ramp up its own energy production. An Australian space rocket making the country's first attempt to reach orbit has crashed shortly after takeoff. The Ares rocket exploded after 14 seconds of flight from a launch pad northwest of Brisbane. But Gilmore Space says it still considers a launch a, quote, big step for Australian capability and is setting its sights on another test flight. The launch came after months of delays. Plenty more ahead. This is Bloomberg. Just want to bring you up to speed. The U.S., Japan, Philippines, and other countries are bracing for tsunamis after that powerful earthquake in Russia's Far East. So waves as high as 4 meters and several injuries were reported by media in Russia after that 8.8 earthquake struck. In Japan, we have seen a tsunami warning issued for parts of Japan. Waves as high as 3 meters expected. That's according to NHK. But so far, we haven't seen that just yet, right? What has been reported so far from the public broadcaster is a 30-centimeter wave was detected in the northernmost region of Hokkaido. Parts of Japan could get waves, though, as high as 3 meters, though. But yes, it could reach the southern parts of the country within hours.
And what we've seen so far is really a lot of precautions taking place, whether that's staff from TEPCO at their Fukushima plants or evacuation orders in Maui County or the cancellation of flights at Sendai Airport. Again, on expectations or precautions in the event that tsunamis, which are reported to be coming over the next few hours, will eventually happen. That's it from us. Plenty more ahead here on Bloomberg Television.